Okay, we're starting.
Can't hear anything. Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm James Rondeau, President, and Eloise W. Martin, Director of the Art Institute of Chicago. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to a conversation today with two extraordinary artists, Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald. Our museum is honored to host their portraits of President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, respectively, in an exhibition opening here tomorrow. As the Obama family's longtime home, Chicago occupies a unique place in their story, as does the Art Institute. It is my great honor to introduce this special message from President Obama.
Thank you, James. And hello, everybody. I want to welcome all of you to the national tour of the Obama portraits, starting right here at the Art Institute of Chicago. This city means so much to me and Michelle. Chicago is where we met, and in fact, our first date included a trip to the Art Institute. It's where we started our family, where I began my political career, and where we're building the Obama Presidential Center. So, when the National Portrait Gallery decided to take portraits of Michelle and me on the road, it made sense to start in Chicago. We love it here, and we figure our portraits will too. Now, obviously, this is only possible thanks to the incredible talent and vision of Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald. We were honored to work with two visionary artists who are immensely talented, but also incredibly thoughtful and committed to using their work for a higher purpose. So thank you again to Kehinde and Amy. Thank you to the Art Institute for sharing what they've created. And thank you to Chicagoans for making art and culture such an important part of our great city. We hope you enjoy the exhibit.
Amazing. We are grateful, Mr. President. Today, we have the terrific opportunity to learn more about these iconic portraits from the most important sources, artists Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald, who have generously agreed to join us today to be in conversation with Jordan Carter, our Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art. To Amy and Kehinde, thank you both and welcome. We are honored to be hosting your work and honored to have you with us today. Of course, we would like to acknowledge with gratitude both President Obama and Mrs. Obama, along with the Obama Foundation, for ongoing and enthusiastic collaboration. We recognize the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery for organizing the national tour and Bank of America for their important and generous support. I extend our deepest thanks to our lead corporate sponsor, Allstate, and our lead individual sponsors, Lester Coney and Denise Gardner, whose generosity, along with a host of other donors from our city, is supporting a summer of access and programming around these newly iconic works of art. I will now turn things over with gratitude to my colleague, Jordan Carter, who's joining us live in our modern wing in front of the Obama portraits. So my most enthusiastic thanks to all. Jordan.
Thank you, James, and thank you, President Obama. It's such an honor to be able to begin our program with those extraordinary words of welcome. It is also a deep honor to host Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald, the artists who created the remarkable portraits just behind me of President Barack Obama and Mrs. Michelle Obama. Kehinde Wiley has firmly situated himself within, as well as shifted the terms of engagement of, art history's portrait painting tradition. Wiley engages the signs and visual rhetoric of the heroic, powerful, majestic, and the sublime in his representation of Black and Brown people from his community and throughout the world. Amy Sherald documents contemporary African-American experience in the United States through arresting otherworldly portraits. Sherald mobilizes the medium of portraiture to tease out unexpected narratives, inviting viewers to engage in a more complex and nuanced consideration of accepted notions of race and representation, and to situate Black heritage centrally in the story of American art. Thank you for being here, and welcome to Kehinde and Amy.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Well, it's so amazing to have you here. I thought we'd maybe start by sort of looking back and also looking forward, if you will. It's been about 3 years since the unveiling of these two amazing portraits behind me. I'm just so curious to hear some of your reflections on sort of the significance of the project for you then, and maybe how the sort of the resonance has sort of shifted, or any sort of different perceptions that you might have on them today.
It has been, what, 3 or 4 years, and it still resonates as deeply as it did when I found out I had the opportunity, and then the day of the unveiling. I think, you know, when people ask me how this portrait has changed my life, I say the most important thing that it's done is that it's made me more accessible to many other people that maybe would not have known who I was, or even maybe have taken an interest in art had they not had the opportunity to go to the National Portrait Gallery and see the painting. So engaging the youth in ways that they were able to connect to painting and portraiture because they were able to see someone that looked like them. And I think, you know, that was the big draw. And for me, that was the thing that I was most delighted about, is that, you know, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, high school students, I received lots of mail that and letters where they were speaking to the fact that they had never really had an interest in art, and now they were, you know, really curious about it and saw it as a possibility of something that they could do with their lives.
That's amazing. Okay, Kehinde, I think you're muted, actually.
Welcome to the 21st century on my No, I should have this right now after a year of lockdown and a year of Zoom calls. And in the 3 years since this Obama portrait hit, I think I've definitely had a new understanding, not only of the way that paintings function in museums, but the way that they function out here in the world. The world increasingly is being shot through cyberspace, shot through Instagram, shot through Facebook. And the way that people have been connecting to this, not only by walking through the museum in Washington, but simply engaging it through friends and people connecting them to this new way of looking at art. The way that we experience art is different when you stand in front of it. And I think that's what's going to be really great about having it there in Chicago. You'll be able to see it as a 3-dimensional object in a room. It contends with you in real space. And you're going to be able to see the scale of that lovely portrait of Michelle Obama, the colors, the texture. You'll be able to see up close the ways in which I attempted to make foliage come forward in as much as the president himself. Painting is something that is certainly about depicting an individual and their career arc. But I think it's also about us, the people looking at it. And insofar as the first day that that painting was given to the world, so much has changed. Paintings and their contents stay the same, but the society who's looking at them constantly change. And I think that this is a wonderful new time, an exciting new time to be creative, Black, alive in America, and able to stand behind two very powerful people who we want to hold up as an example of what excellence is. And at its best, that is what museums do. Museums stand at that place where we say, okay, this is who we are as civilization, and this is what we stand for.
Thank you. Those are two really powerful, powerful reflections. I'm curious if you could just speak a little bit more about the process of making the painting, and even just, your thoughts going into the Oval Office when you first sort of had the encounter with the president and the first lady, and were just taking on this massive assignment. Like, just what was going through your mind? What was that like?
Yeah, I have a funny story. I think I went to the White House, and I guess because I'm an artist, the first thing I noticed was just how drab the lighting is, and like the rest of the White House, just like fluorescent lighting. So I'm waiting to go in, and when you walk into the Oval Office, it's backlit from behind all of this crown molding, and it's like really beautiful, and it brings everything to life. And I just remember walking in and seeing the president for the first time. And I guess it was because the light had like played a trick on my mind or something, but for about 5 seconds, I couldn't figure out whether it was happening or whether I was dreaming. Like, it was a legitimate moment where I was like kind of confused. And so as he walked towards me to introduce himself, it clicked in. I'm like, Amy, you have to say something, because it's really interesting to only have seen someone on television, and it's almost like a shock to the system to see someone in person. He's a tall guy, so like all my senses were overloaded, and he walks up to me and he says, "Looks like you got the memo." And I'm nervous, so I'm like, "What memo? What are you talking about?" But he was referring to the fact that that day all of us had worn the same color. So he had on like his kind of taupey brown suit. Michelle had on brown, and I had on brown, so we were all matching. But it was really fun. And by the way, Kehinde and I did not plan to dress alike today. We just showed up in white shirts.
Man, so no, it's definitely it's a trip, and it's interesting because I don't think we've ever shared notes about like that moment where you step into the looking glass, and what once was kind of a notion becomes a possibility. You don't just get the job of painting Barack Obama's official portrait. You sit down and you have a discussion, and you have a meeting of minds. You try to figure out whether or not his goals in terms of representation align with what it is that I've spent my entire career doing. I happen to be someone who spent his entire career painting portraits of people who happen to look like me, but also come from all parts of the world, underserved communities, by and large, people who are minding their own business, trying to get to work. You tap them on the shoulder and then invite them to become subjects in a painting. And most people say no. Most people are kind of weirded out by this notion of public engagement. Who are you? What is this picture? There's this transformation of a moment of chance now being captured in a photograph, deliberated upon, many months later being beheld on some of the great walls of museums throughout the world. It's this strange transformation act between the unknown, between the moment of chance and radical contingency, and then this use of historical poses and power, the way that people have been presented, whether it be kings or queens or aristocrats. I think there's an incredible transformation there that Barack Obama and I discussed in a very interesting way. He said to me, your work is about taking the little guy off the street and making him or her noble and emboldened and graceful and seen. Well, I happen to be the president of the United States of America, and there's going to be a slightly different set of ingredients to work with here. So I think what we attempted to do within that conversation was to try to figure out a language that looked at the vocabulary of power, but almost walked right past it. To be able to look at him squarely and to say, what is it that defines you in terms of body language? What are the contours of your relationship to your public? And how can I be of service to make that something that lives, something that's timeless, and something that's a bit surprising?
So
Yeah.
on this vocabulary of power, I'm curious to hear you both talk a little bit about, the relationship between portraiture and power generally. I mean, the lineage, of course, of presidential portraits is a lineage of power, but even just, the politics of sitting for a portrait holds, so much, relationship between power, who gets the ability to be seen, who gets the ability to view. How does this sort of play out in your practice generally as artists who paint subjects?
When I am out on the street living my life looking for my models, I see my connection to them and the ability to be able to draw them into my studio. Because like Kehinde said, it's a whole thing. But I think the process of painting them is putting them into a position of power, especially when these paintings are going into, museums and institutions like that, and becoming archetypes of sorts and telling, American stories, and inserting itself into the art canon. I don't think I think about power in portraiture as the same way as Kehinde does. But I think for me, like that's my connection to it is, finding someone that is just an everyday person walking down the street, minding their own business. And all of a sudden, I connect with them and then they give me the opportunity to, essentially make them a part of art history.
Yeah.
Kehinde, do you have any further reflections on that?
Well, I mean, ultimately, what we're doing is we're playing within and outside of time. There's something really special about portraiture that is different than other parts of Western art practice. Unlike painting a bowl of fruit or a flower, which we all know decay and which we all know will die, and we all know that those beautiful paintings are a hedge against time, and we're able to appreciate them in a much more bracketed sense. The portrait allows us to look in the eye of someone who came before us and to have a moment of empathy that leaps across time. There's something incredibly powerful about going into old Dutch collections of art and seeing how people dress themselves, these funny collars and these muted tones. Fashion decays, the ways that people choose to decorate and adorn themselves come and go. But I think the desire to be fly, the desire to be loved, the desire to be indelible, to be able to say that I'm here, that's something that is timeless and something that crosses all cultural boundaries. It's something that we are at the service of, but the way that art is made now is we can sort of accept past utterances and conventions, but we can also look at the ways that they've been done as yet another color on our palette. We can sort of hold the expectations about what a portraiture should and can be and suspend that, arrest that. We can choose to participate in those languages, heighten or diminish certain parts of it or its features. We can choose to thwart aspects of what it is that we choose, what we want. All of this in the end, if you look at both Amy's work, I suspect, and my work certainly, is a combination of images made over an entire lifetime that amount for portraits of others, but I think in the end, they're portraits of us, the artists. they're sort of pointing back to ourselves. They become a type of mirror.
Mm.
So sure, I'm out there in the world, but it's also me looking. It's me choosing, which is what's so unique about the Obama portraits. Here, it's a democratic process in which the American people chose. Here, it's us being called from on high to participate in a practice that's centuries old. And all the rules that I'm used to, and I suspect, Amy, this applies to both of us, have been completely thrown out, and we have to sort of create something anew, to create a new form of representation that relies on what we know to be true, what we've mastered over time, but also you're out here shadow dancing. You're out here creating something that you just have to respond to emotionally yourself. It's you alone in that studio, and you pray that the world loves your baby as much as you do.
Thank you. And I'm curious, would you actually consider yourselves portrait artists? Like, do you see any value or currency in that nomenclature or that categorization? Or, how do you relate to that terminology?
Until I won the National Portrait Gallery competition, I did not call my paintings portraits. I just call them paintings. And the reason is that once I start the painting, I almost leave the model behind because the painting becomes to represent something that's much bigger than the very moment of like just me taking this picture of the model. But I slip back and forth with using that in my vocabulary in describing my work. I think it's an easy way to codify and connect with the work. And I ask myself that question a lot of like whether my paintings are portraits or not, and I still haven't quite made up my mind. I say I have painted 2 portraits. One is of the First Lady, Michelle Obama, and the second one is of Breonna Taylor. Those are definitely 2 portraits that I've painted of people, and they exist in time in these paintings as themselves. So.
Yeah, that Breonna Taylor painting is fire. And there's something so singular about it. I mean, it's so quintessentially an American portrait. And I was so proud to see it grace every social media screen, every major news outlet, and to make it felt like as though it populated the world in a moment of grief, but also in a moment of grace. Just you really nailed it. There was something about the colors, the body language. Amy has an ability to make portraiture certainly about the individual, but I think it's also about a kind of emotional temperature. And in that painting, again, it's just sort of, it sits at the adjunct between this very sad moment. I think even just the use of color and this kind of balancing between complementary notes, but also a kind of all over stillness. Something that we, certainly you, Amy, should be very proud of.
Oh, thank you.
Well, in that regard, Amy, in terms of you saying that like Breonna and Miss Michelle Obama would be your only portraits per se, I'm curious to hear from both of you. You both paint people who you would encounter perhaps in your everyday daily lives. How did it sort of shift your approach or your process to be painting, icons, celebrities, literally the president and the first lady? Did that change the way in which you approach the subject?
For me, it did not. I needed to approach it the same way that I would approach anything else. And I feel like I painted 2 people when I painted Mrs. Obama. I painted Michelle Obama from the South Side of Chicago, who's very accessible and who everyone fell in love with. And she gave many of us permission just to be ourselves. And then I painted a portrait of the First Lady. Because what I wanted to capture in this painting of her was something that we had never seen in all of the images that exist of her on the internet. So something that just felt intimate and truly authentically her. So my approach didn't change. I don't think that, I say I paint American people, and she is this extraordinary American woman. And she sits at the pinnacle of who we all could, aspire to be. And, but I always feel like I'm disappointing people when I say it didn't change my practice, but it just didn't. Like you kind of just have to go into it like this is another painting. Otherwise, I feel like you just might mess it up. You know what I mean? When you try to be all special and like try to like switch it up for something that's this big, I never think it's a good idea. So I really had to turn off that part of my brain and just connect to who she was as a Black woman painting another Black woman.
Comes across. I think that in terms of my own practice, looking at art history and almost obsessing over the ways that power has been presented, it was kind of a perfect training school for a moment like this. It's almost akin to when you really want to write a great novel, you read as many novels as you can and then pretend as though and then try to forget about it and proceed with the story that you want to tell. Deep inside your reptilian mind, you have all the answers with regards to what power should be, where it has been. But then you also have to recognize that you're standing in the front of something that has never happened before. A person who's never happened before, a presidency that has never happened before. You're tasked at painting a miracle. You're tasked at painting America at a certain point, this human being at a certain trajectory within his life's arc. And I really wanted to make a portrait that was forward-moving, forward-thinking, but also looking backwards. All of those flowers that you see behind him come from different chapters within Obama's life. Flowers that come from Chicago, certainly, but flowers that are native to Hawaii, native to Kenya, native to Indonesia. The kind of global presence and reach of one man's story, I think has an ability in that painting and certainly in his presidency to resonate all over the place. And it was a refreshing project to engage in. It was also challenging for those myriad reasons.
I can imagine, and it definitely does resonate, both portraits vividly. I'm curious though, if you could speak a little bit about, could you maybe talk about the way in which both portraits, to me at least, seem to have a very surreal quality. They're not like straightforward depictions. They are very representative, but they're not straightforward. I'm curious if you can maybe talk a little bit about how you see sort of the relationship between representation and abstraction in your practices.
Well, when I was in graduate school, in the process of like figuring out what my artistic DNA was and like, what voice I was going to be in the art world, how I was going to speak visually. I borderlined I was right there in the middle between abstraction and figuration. So I would paint a full figure and then I would paint the whole canvas black. And then I would bring the figure out from behind this veil. And I studied with Grace Hardigan, who's a well-known abstract expressionist, and I guess little bits of how she worked kind of rubbed off on me. It's something that I always played around with and found a sense of freedom in. But I'm always drawn back to the figure. So when approaching this portrait, and recognizing like how I see and how I paint things, like I naturally have a tendency to compress certain areas of the painting. So some areas might be two-dimensional and some areas will read as three-dimensional. And with this dress, I saw the opportunity to do that, to make it something that could function on its own as a painting. and then something that was a part of the bigger painting itself. So, you know, I made reference to the G-spin quilters, and when working with Meredith Coop and trying to figure out, you know, what dress we were going to wear, that's one thing that really resonated with me about this dress. And yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I love about your work, Amy, is that it is it's never been a baby that you have to split. I love great painting when it functions on a formal level without regard to it being a figure or a landscape or a color field. Great painting is great painting. And you know, when you can see that in the history of Western easel painting, looking at some of those really great Tiepolo ceiling frescoes where the organization of space gets really dense and tight and peopled. And then all of a sudden an explosion of sky and color releases this rapturous bond of light. This is something that goes beyond this false dichotomy of figurative versus abstraction. I think that throughout the history of painting, artists of goodwill and people who know the stuff of what makes a great painting have known that it's about the organization of movement, color, light, space, form, and keeping that eye moving from one point to the next, and allowing for surprise to be embedded within a painting, to sort of know when to give a quick release of color, but also know how to draw the eye in so that you could recognize very small, deliberate strokes. These are things that happen when you look at paintings in person. I don't want to make it seem as though the digital age is this sort of grand space for looking at art. There's something to be said about each one of you guys who are watching this tonight, this afternoon, depending on wherever you are in the world, that we must take ourselves to public institutions to go look at art. There's something happening right now where Black and brown and female voices are being allowed to participate in something that heretofore has been so ivory tower and exclusive. I remember back when I was a young kid growing up, taking art classes in South Central Los Angeles, I would have these little forays, little field trips to go look at art at the Huntington Gardens and libraries in Southern California. And I would look at these paintings of these landed gentry, these aristocrats with their powdered wigs and their jewels and their lapdogs. And it all looked very removed and strange, sort of vacuum sealed in culture and time. But at the same time, I was like completely drawn into it as well. It was just fascinating and freakish and otherworldly. There's something about the performance of making paintings and the performance of being in a painting that there's a kind of simultaneity of both of these things going on at once that can't be overlooked. When you ask Amy or myself what type of painters we are, I would even posit that this is more of like a performance. I would posit that this is more of like a conceptual project or a social project. This has a reach that goes beyond just an image on a wall. It points to how societies are formed, what we value within those societies, and who's allowed to shine within those walls.
100%. Maybe we can actually just do a little deep dive into each portrait for a moment. Could we actually get a close-up view of the portrait of President Obama? And Kehinde, you've already mentioned sort of the symbolism of these flowers, the chrysanthemum, representing Chicago, and the African Blue Lily representing President Obama's father's heritage in Kenya, and also the white jasmine in Hawaii. But I'm curious, could you speak to us a little bit about why you chose to go in this direction? Like, what made you want to sort of put him in this sort of wall of foliage and kind of take the portrait outside of simply a physical representation into something far more distributed?
Right. Well, traditionally, many of the commissioned portraits of heads of state and kings, queens, dignitaries, aristocrats, these portraits tend to fall within a certain formula. So generally what happens in that formula is that there's the powerful man, usually he sits forward within the space, and then behind him is land that generally pictures his holdings, his home, his source of income. And it comes from title and a sense of landedness in Western European painting. What I wanted to do was to remove the landscape, to sort of question its presence. And so once you have that void, the question is, what do you fill it with? I wanted to fill it with something that had a personality of its own. I wanted the background to start to demand space of its own. I wanted it to feel as though it were alive, living. As you can see, the background is in certain points growing over his body, growing over his feet. There's this push-pull between foreground, background, and in much of a sense, the background is almost demanding to be a star of the show. I started something like this using young African-American models from the streets of Harlem years ago, where I would use late French Rococo filigree. And I wanted to fill those spaces with decorative components that came from the Rococo, because the poses were coming from the Rococo. I was always concerned with this echo. How do you take the body language from the past, the decorative language from the past, and insert it firmly into the present tense? But that said, I also wanted the subjects of the paintings to be firmly inserted into the conversation of art that was happening in the present tense. So that's a reason why the background is demanding space. That's why it's rude. That's why it's shoving and demanding to grow over. It refuses to disappear, to be invisible. That's a kind of metaphor for how I see the sitters of my painting, how I see social revolutions of all sorts. The background no longer is something to be consumed or something to be annexed or colonized, but now it becomes this opportunity for new fields of providence.
I love that. And maybe we could talk about a few of the other details here. If I understand correctly, this chair doesn't actually exist. Is that correct? Like, what is this chair that we're looking at?
Well, the chair does exist in a way. I mean, it's an amalgamation of chairs that I've seen all over the place. I wanted to try to figure out something that felt historic, but also kind of disappeared at once. You know, you don't want to put him in like an IKEA fold out, nor did you want him sort of floating in space. The trouble with this way of working is that you're working sort of inside of the rules of physics and outside of it. Where is up, where is down, where's the horizon line? What is one standing on? In this world that's created, one is defining your own gravity. The gravitational pull that exists within that painting is defined by the sitter. And so the space itself bends and creates a kind of floor, even though it's clearly an optical illusion. It's designed to sort of flatten yet fold at once.
And in this particular portrait, my eyes go sort of directly towards the hands. Can you speak a little bit about the way you rendered these like exquisitely rendered hands?
Well, hands are telling in paintings. Oftentimes hands are clenched. Many times hands are wielding sticks and swords. There's a desire for dignity, strength, domination in paintings. And there's just so much that the hands have been at service to. And I think that much of it has to do with the kind of hyper masculinity that you see posited in so many paintings. I can't tell you how many paintings I've done of men on horseback holding sticks and swords. Oftentimes I'm doing these paintings because it's a critique of the way that masculinity was coded for in historical painting space. What I do is I actually get real horses and I put people on them and I attempt to photograph them. And what you realize very early on is that those paintings from the past were lying to you. No one is the scale that they are in the paintings in real life. In real life, men look very small on horses. In paintings of a certain type, let's say between the 16th and 19th century Europe, you're looking at some paintings in which the horses are dwarfed and they're being controlled by the pinky. And in the other hand, there's some sort of device to club someone with. This is a use of hands that is deserving of critique. In Obama's portrait, I wanted to create a kind of openness. There's a reason why his hands are at rest, why he's leaning forward to you. There's a kind of soft power that does not need to announce itself at once. A kind of confidence and a kind of humanity and empathy, which is where truth, in my opinion, where truth, strength is found. And I think that ultimately what you arrive at is a much more noble portrait because of its sense of self-possession, its sense of staid power, its sense of self-knowing. I think that's what I was trying to get at.
I love that term, soft power. You really have achieved that. And it's really, you've rendered him as such a powerful icon, but also this approachable human. And I think there are two other details I wanted to quickly point out that I think really contribute to this effect. And that's the fact that his buttons are undone, almost as though he's kind of revealing himself. He's like, he's approachable, he's casual, and also the gray hairs. Can you which obviously are, something that we really don't see, accentuated in presidential portraiture. Could you speak a little bit about those decisions?
Well, obviously, I could have gone into Photoshop and made his gray hairs disappear, but I think that that's accurate. I think that there's something cool about having a painting that feels like what we all know to be true. That while still an incredibly handsome president who looks great in a painting, there was an entire presidency to endure, and you're going to earn some grays. And I think that those earned grays should be in the portrait. I'm sure we all heard the day of the unveiling when President Obama poked a few jabs at me for leaving those in there. But I'm willing to pay the price for that. I think that there's something to be said about a painting that feels like the moment that it's in. The buttons were his idea. He wanted to feel comfortable in the portrait. He wanted to be at ease. The pose was not posed. There were thousands and thousands of images taken. And this is one of those moments of absolute repose that happened in between trained shots. It was almost like an outtake that, in a way, pointed me to a kind of truth that can't be posed. So I think that when you talk about authenticity, that poses it. The gray hairs are it. And of course, the rest of it is so much of the artifice that we have to endure and engage as people who are interested in the history of art and the techniques and materials of fabricating art. But in the end, what we pray for at its best are these moments of clarity and actuality that oftentimes shines, well, sometimes shines through in painting.
Thank you. Thank you so much for really going into those awesome details. Yes, that's super powerful. Thank you. Perhaps we can zoom into the portrait of Mrs. Obama now and speak about some of the details that are unraveling there. Amy, you spoke a bit already about sort of the significance of the dress. Could you maybe just talk a little bit more about why you wanted to sort of emphasize Black creativity through G's Bend and maybe any other references at play in this geometric abstraction?
It was an opportunity for me to ground her in Black history without being too didactic, you know? It's something that I gave a lot of thought about when making this portrait. How can I make it a portrait for America, but then how can I make it a portrait for a moment for you know, Black Americans? And the significance of those patterns is something that never left me when I first saw the exhibition of the James Rondeau quilters at the Whitney Museum. Probably, I think it was way back in 2008. And it was just such an experience, and I had such a connection to their work. My mother is from Alabama, so I had a connection to where they came from. I felt like I knew them because I knew that, you know, I had probably traveled some of the same roads that they traveled and seen some of the same things. And it was an opportunity to bring to light a craft that is oftentimes you know, forgotten, although it'd be a huge part of a lot of family traditions. So that was the main reason, was like trying to figure out how to make something that could be not only ours and just for us, but then also for the American people as well.
And as we can see, the dress actually goes beyond the frame. It's almost as though it enters the space of the viewer, and it feels almost like, you know, it's bringing us in that way. Could you speak a little bit to your intentionality around sort of having it sort of go out of the frame and having it be sort of uncontained?
Yes. So when I photographed her, I photographed her in many different poses, from the front, from the side. This was one pose that I really thought was beautiful because the way that the dress laid itself out all the way around her. But when I was editing the image and I went to crop it, I made a choice to corner those edges and to crop them off, because it kind of flattened out the image a little bit and allowed it to almost be, you know, take on the shape of an inanimate object. You know, it's almost like she's sitting atop a mountain or she's at the top of a pyramid. So just the play between the, you know, what would be a three-dimensional rendering versus something that's flattened out. I just thought it was really interesting. And those are the ways that I like to have fun in what I do. I mean, I call my style of painting and the way that I paint, I say, you know, I paint this way because it's almost like I have a visual dyslexia or something like that, you know? So it's something that it's just how my eye sees, but I was also able to recognize it as something that in my work makes it different and interesting.
Definitely, it's gorgeous. It's interesting because while Kehinde's, this is just an observation, while Kehinde's portrait of President Obama is like grounded in the earth and like in sort of that the greenery of the earth, it seems almost like this portrait of Michelle Obama, that she's almost in the air and sort of, you know, almost ethereal. So they're really distinctly complementary almost in that way. But it's interesting to hear Kehinde talk about sort of the colonized space of the background, because in sort of many of your works, you always decontextualize the background with sort of a monochromatic color, which in this case is this sky blue. And I was hoping you could maybe just talk a little bit about this choice.
Yes, it's something that I just, you know, within my body of work from the beginning to now, you'll see a transition of how I, solve the problem of space, because I've always been a painter that just wanted to focus on the figure. I didn't, and I mean, now my work has evolved past that, but when it came to these portraits that I make of these individual people, where I decided to crop them at the knee, was because I wanted to make a almost life-size, painting of this person. But it hits all the points that I'm interested in. And so in the beginning, I would use this kind of like speckling technique that allowed me to activate the space, but not draw too much attention to it. And as my practice progressed, it's something that just slowly stopped working. And so when it came to this painting of Mrs. Obama, I wanted to create something that would as you said, like give it an airy feel. I felt like if I used any other color, she would just be almost like pressed up against that color, like with no space behind her. And I wanted it to have kind of an ethereal feel. I knew that I was going to use blue, and I took a lot of time to figure out which kind of blue it was. So it's, I just didn't like squirt out some cerulean and some titanium. I did many different renditions of many different colors, and I decided that not mixing white into this blue gave it the kind of special quality that I wanted it to have. So I use an old Holland yellow light, and I use that color a lot because it's not white. It's like the palest color of yellow, but it changes it just enough to deepen the space the way that I like, even though it's not painted in a way that it's, where it's like a gradation from like light to dark, which is like what you might see most of the time to trick the viewer into thinking that there is space there. So it is a flat blue, but it still feels like, I think that you could push your hand past her. So the painting doesn't stop at the dress. It creates a space around her, but then allows you solely to focus on her. And it's similar to the same choice that I made for the painting of Breonna Taylor. I spent a lot of time mixing the perfect color, and it just, it wasn't just like turquoise and white. It's like I had to kind of play around with it to get this glowing effect that hopefully is not just in my mind, but this glowing effect that the paint can have, I think, if mixed properly and using the right palette.
So speaking a little bit more about sort of the nuance and specificity of your color choices, Amy, could you maybe talk a little bit about, sort of the conceptual and aesthetic impetus surrounding your use of gray to render skin tones, both in this portrait and more broadly?
Mm-hmm. It's something that I just happened to start doing it. So I don't know, 2007, I'm in my studio, and at that point in time, I was trying to paint like my hero, Kehinde Wiley. And I was, painting the figures gray. And then I was using a glaze of brown over it. And so something just, one day I just decided to finish the rest of the painting first. And I left the figure gray. And so in the beginning, it was just an aesthetic choice. But I realized, 2 and 3 years later down the road, like you look back at what you're doing and you're processing your emotion behind it. And I realized that subconsciously I had a fear that the work that I was making, because I was painting Black figures, that the work was going to be marginalized in the conversation that I was trying to have was going to be solely about identity. And that's not how I wanted the work to exist. I didn't want it to exist solely in that way, although it can be employed in that way. And so, that was the story then. And now 10 years later, I'm still thinking about it. And I think it's graduated to an opportunity to allow the viewer to engage with the figure without that being the most salient part of it, or the thing that they use to codify who this person is. My paintings are very quiet, and I think they really, speak to the interior life of who we are as a people, versus how we're portrayed in the media. And so, it became it's a reflection of really of that notion, and wanting the viewer to see this image as something that's universal, but then also, for people that look like me, that look like you, that they can walk into a museum institution and see something that reflects who they are. After I started making these, I started to do research and came across a lot of, daguerreotypes and photographs that affirmed what I was doing, and also became my work, essentially became a meditation on photography, because it was the first way that I actually found myself. I never saw myself in a painting until I saw Bo Bartlett's painting when I was in the 6th grade. And then in graduate school, I saw Kehinde's work. So those were the 2 moments that I was able to see myself represented on a canvas.
Mhm.
So I lost my train of thought. What was I saying before that?
You're talking about photography and it's
Yeah, so the work became a meditation on photography, and you might see written that my work is inspired by photography, but it was actually the opposite. It's something, the gray is it's something that I just started doing, the photography, and my relation to it is something that came afterwards. But it's I think that answer will constantly evolve. But I think to single it down to one answer, I just was trying to keep the work out of a corner.
Yeah, in many ways, I feel like the gray sort of, it disrupts and sort of, obfuscates. It also, sort of disregards sort of stereotypes or judgments or anything that could be sort of projected onto what one perceives as an accepted notion or representation of Blackness. In that regard, I'm actually sort of curious to ask you both, as the first Black artist to be commissioned by the National Portrait Gallery to create a portrait of a president and first lady, and of the first Black president and the first Black first lady, what is the magnitude of that, and how does that resonate with you today? What do you sort of hope that will signal? Or, I'm just really curious to hear about the import of that.
I think it's, I think the most important thing is just that what a Black woman's voice can bring into this conversation of portraiture and art making. I would have to think about that. Kehinde, do you have an answer?
Yeah, I think it's a high watermark, but it's also a new normal.
Yeah.
We've made it now possible for an entire generation of young people, not only Black and brown young people, but young people all over the world, to have grown up in a world in which a Black man is the leader of the free world. Just facts. Not editorializing those facts, not putting anything on it. That's just the new normal. The new normal now includes 2 African-American artists who have created portraits of the president and first lady. And that now is part of the historical record. Again, facts.
Yeah.
These are now the new, this is now the new oxygen that we will have to breathe. And there's no going back from that. In the blast zone of the Obama's decision to make that happen, there will be a lot of winners. And I think the winners are those young kids who get inspired by that. Those people who feel like There's space in the conversation for them, not because anyone went out of their way to point them out, but rather because their sheer existence, the humble fact of their presence was being nodded to in a very big way by virtue of their presence. Insofar as the achievements of the Obama presidency, historians will opine on that for generations to come. There's so many achievements to applaud, but I think symbolically, if anything, we can point to a symbolic shift in terms of what is now fact, what is now the oxygen that we breathe and the new norm.
Mhm.
Yeah, you both have definitely shifted the terms of engagement, and these are paradigm shifting works that are like no presidential portrait before them in so many powerful ways. They're enduringly contemporary. And that just makes me want to think about the future and just ask maybe one more question before we turn it over to Q&A. And that sort of, how do you engage, or how do you hope that these works will engage future artists and young people? Maybe Kehinde, you could speak a little bit about, your work in Senegal with sort of the Black Rock Artist Residency. And Amy, I'm curious to hear about your youth engagement and how sort of you see your works as inspiring young girls, and sort of seeing sort of the media deluge of young girls dressing up in the Millie dress and wanting to sort of resemble and be a part of this archive of Black American life that you're creating.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's something that's happening right now. And I don't know if it's a new thing or if it's new to me, but I'm starting to see a lot of young Black artists who are having access to the marketplace and access to cash, giving it back and creating art residencies and creating opportunities for the next set. That's not something that's been done heretofore. There's foundations and there's organizations that have traditionally had that role, and I proudly stand on the shoulders of the Studio Museum in Harlem, an institution that I came through when I first came out of Yale to find my way in New York City. And they were few and far between when I first got to New York. And now as I'm starting to see artists getting an opportunity to show and to be recognized, they're handing it back. And it's especially out here in West Africa. I'm speaking from Senegal, where I've created an artist in residency program called Black Rock. You can check out blackrocksenegal.org to get information about it. But it's a space that is devoted to finding artists all over the world. And they're open to apply of all races, ages, nationalities. And ultimately, what we want to do is to have a center of artistic excellence happen on the west coast of Africa. You're sitting here on the shores of Senegal and soon to be other countries here in West Africa. And what I want is for artists of goodwill all over the place to remember Africa as that site of creative possibility, to be able to have people sit across the dining room table and to elicit conversations that start with who we are. What is this place, and what does Africa look like, feel like to work in right now? It's a lot different, I'm telling you, than those media images that you were given. I am blessed to be able to live and to work anywhere in this world, and I'm sitting here in Senegal. I think that there's an opportunity not only within the fine arts, but you're starting to see that with writing programs and with performing arts programs. There's a type of generosity and a type of giving that hasn't happened in the dominant culture. And I think it's a really, really exciting time, and I'm proud to be part of it.
Mhm.
Amy, do you have any thoughts on the future, or the future of presidential portraiture, of just the future of your archive? I call it an archive because I feel like it's just these moments of American life that you render and compile that I think have so much influence on young people. Just curious for you to reflect on some of these thoughts.
I am excited about the possibilities of doing those kinds of things, residencies. After I completed my first photo shoot with Michelle, I walked up to her and I said, I just want to thank you for giving me this opportunity, because I plan to pay it forward. And I saw that opportunity as a way for me to do that. And, like Kehinde, there's a number of artists, Black artists, who are starting residencies because coming out of grad school, being visiting chair at the Maryland Institute College of Art, and coming across young Black graduate students and undergraduate students, I'm realizing that we're all a little bit behind. And so I see it as an opportunity right now. What I can do is mentor and make sure that they are reading the right things and that they are learning how to write about their work so that they can control their narrative, and just talking to them about their work. Because one thing I find is that a lot of these graduate programs aren't equipped to talk to artists of color or Black artists about what they're doing. And so, I've had students reach out to me to say, well, my director just told me that I could just call you and you could come in. Like, they're not even taking the initiative to set them up for success. So those are things that are definitely on my mind. One thing that I was able to do with the sale of the Breonna Taylor painting was to take those proceeds and put them towards educational scholarships in the city of Louisville. So that's me dipping my toe in, and I'm still I consider myself, I'm still a baby in the game, and 4 years in, but I do have big plans, and I love sitting around daydreaming. And I have so many people to look up to who have showed us how to be successful and then how to take that money and give back. So Titus Kaphar, Kehinde, Theaster, Mark Bradford, all of these artists are really setting a wonderful model for all of us to follow.
Thank you. And I think that's on the note of the future and the youth. I think it's a great segue to some of the pre-submitted questions we have from our teen council. I think I'll ask you, the first question is from Nakaya Longstreet. He's a junior at GCE Lab School, and his question for you both is, when creating this artwork, what were some of the difficulties throughout the process in finalizing the piece?
Well, for me, the biggest difficulty was quieting down my brain about the importance and the impact of it. Allowing the freshness to stay there as opposed to overworking it into oblivion. Paintings are oftentimes, it's really hard to know when something's done. For me, it's always like a deadline. It's like, okay, it's done because unless you put this on the wall, you're not gonna have a show. But oftentimes, there's a tendency to be so careful. I think Amy alluded to this a bit earlier when talking about just trying to treat the portrait as though it were any other. You try to create that space for yourself. Ultimately, you know that it's not. And I didn't make anything easier for myself than by painting the painting with a time-lapse camera going on behind me. So as opposed to it being just sort of standard feed, it was this high resolution photo being taken every, I don't know, often was it 15 seconds or something. So like once you lull yourself into thinking, okay, this is just a normal moment, like once again, think again. There is though something really cool about high wire acts. It pulls the best out of you. I love being under pressure. I love surprising myself and giving myself challenges that I am not quite sure I can meet. I think that's when I'm at my best. When I'm scared, I know that I'm doing something good. And then, I sat back when the painting was done and I was like, this is good. It's not going to be understood by everyone. It's not going to be loved and embraced. It's not familiar. When I go through the National Portrait Gallery and I see those sepia-toned, smoky paintings of mostly of all white men in a very staid and familiar environment, this is going to be another thing. So get yourself ready. The hardest part, to answer the question in its simplest form, was to calm down.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Another funny story. I started working on the painting, and again, like Kehinde, I think my fear, for some reason, I personified Black Twitter in my head as like this big monster that was going to come get me and like ruin my life if nobody liked this painting. And people are like, what is Black Twitter? I'm like, you don't want to know. But I also remember like being close to the end of it and then having a conversation with somebody at the Smithsonian. It was probably Dorothy Moss. And then I can't remember what happened, but I just remember hearing that Kehinde was done and that he was like on a beach somewhere, and I was still stressing out. And I remember I started crying. I'm like, oh my God, I still have to do her hair, you know, and all this kind of stuff. It was really it was nerve-wracking. Like I make a joke and I say I never want to do it again, but that's only when I think about like the anxiousness of it. And like, you know, it for me, it came along with the fear because like I had to keep it a secret. And, you know, they were like, you know, no pictures. So I didn't even have anybody taking pictures. And it just so happened that the former dean of my graduate school, Dr. Leslie King Hammond, she was like, nobody's going to care 20 years from now that you have pictures of this. So I'm very lucky that she like made sure that I had some images of me painting, because I felt like, well, if I take some pictures, like somebody's gonna know and I'm gonna get in trouble. It was just like a million things going through my head of like the, you know, the possibilities of things that could go wrong. And it's happy secrets are hard to keep.
Yeah.
And so, you know.
Well, do you remember, Amy, that moment where we couldn't tell anybody else about it, but I think we met in New York, and it was at like the Armory
Show, yeah. I was
Yeah.
like waiting. I'm like, I'm gonna introduce myself to Kehinde. I had never met him before, and I'm awkward in general. Like I'm just an awkward introverted person. But I was like, hi, Kehinde. I'm Amy. I've also been chosen. And I was like, okay, nice to meet you. Bye. Like.
Well, that was great. It was like a pressure release valve to even be able to talk about it. You know what I mean?
You're right.
And beautiful secret to have.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing secret. I can only imagine. I wouldn't be able to keep it. We have another question here that I want to ask that for you both, which is actually from Finley Williams, who is at Lane Tech High School. And she asks, which is a really great question, what is your favorite detail in the portrait?
For me, it's one that probably won't be seen by anyone. It's the letter that I wrote to Obama on the back of the painting. It's basically a moment to have the painting function both as something that's being seen publicly, but also something that just never sees the light of day.
I saw that during installation, and I was gonna ask
Don't
about
share,
it.
don't share.
It felt so tender in private that I wasn't gonna bring it up. But yeah, that's an amazing little secret as well.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Amy?
I have many different ones, but it's the dress. I think the first thing that came to my mind when you asked me that question were the colors in the dress. I really liked that the yellow was like a tertiary yellow, like not quite the yellow that you would think. And then there was pink and the black and the white. It's the colors in the dress. And then I really enjoyed painting her hair. I had a great time painting her hair.
And so there's a question specifically for you, Amy. And that is from, where is it? Here we go. Also from Finley Williams from Lane Tech High School. What do you hope that the portrait says or shows about the First Lady?
I hope that it offers you the opportunity to just experience the Michelle that's off stage, not on, and not in the media, just who she is in her authentic self.
Definitely, and I think you succeeded at that. And Kehinde, for you, what was it like to work so intimately with the former president?
It was great. I mean, Barack Obama is, as Amy said, a huge, easily one of the most famous people in the world. And so one thing that he has evolved, that I'm not sure if it's happened as a result of the presidency or if this is just a part of his nature, but he's incredibly disarming. You know, you walk into a room and he's charming and on ground level. There's not this sense of you're being spoken down to, or it's impossible to engage on a human level. It's just like it's very one-to-one. And so one of the things that I really appreciated about this was the ability to kind of disabuse myself of what it means to meet or interact with someone that high up in the clouds. I think in my life experience, the people who have the most power and responsibility and blessings are those people who oftentimes carry it with a sense of grace and humanity. I think that's oftentimes what leads to a bit of success when it comes to interacting politically and socially. I think there's an element of realpolitik there, but I think there's also an element of just personal nature. I think there's some things that you just can't fake. And insofar as that's been an asset for both Barack and Michelle, it certainly helped me to calm way down and concentrate on the task at hand.
Yeah, I agree. It was the same. It was the same with Mrs. Obama. It's just, people ask like, what was it like? And I was like, it was just regular, you know what I mean? Because she doesn't carry herself. It's not like, Queen Elizabeth walking into the room and we have to curtsy. It's like, hey girl. And then like, what kind of music do you want to listen to during the shoot? And it's like, let's put on some rap music, so it was just really easy. They're human and just adorable people.
Yeah.
And you both really captured and expressed that humanity, and it's so powerful. I'm going to ask one last question from a student, and I've said before, I really like to call these portraits distinctly complimentary, but they ask to you the question. I'm going to make sure I'm saying it correctly. They ask, how do you think that the portraits complement one another and or contrast each other, if at all?
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
I was thinking about that when we were sent images of how these paintings are going to be hung in the museum. And it was something that I wasn't aware of until the last minute. And so I hadn't really gotten a sense of like, how do they look? How do they function next to each other? How will they either work with or against each other? And there's something formally that you can see almost immediately from left to right when looking at the portraits. One operates in a very cool register, one operates in a very warm register. One of them occupies a kind of grounded sense of actual tectonic space, and one sort of floats in a kind of nebulous, not quite anywhere but everywhere space. And I think that that is quite complementary. I think that they are nodding towards the same goal, but arriving at two different planets. And ultimately, that signifies so much about who the president and first lady are. Partners in crime, partners, but also distinctly different personalities that are complementary. You feel that immediately when you're in the room with them, and you get the sense that that is definitely the state of affairs when you see them as two paintings on the wall.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I love the fact that if they both walked out of these paintings, that together they're, it's just how we somehow made these two paintings that, the figures, they match each other in size, and then the colors are complementary. I mean, they could go off to a dinner party. They could walk out of these paintings and go off into a dinner party, and they would look magnificent together. And uh, some people ask, like, "Were you going to text him to see what he's doing for it?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know him, so I can't." So it's just like, I think, it just means so much that there's little bits of us that are like the same person, because we approach this very differently. But like you said, like, we arrived at the same place. And I just thought that was wonderful when I first saw yours. And it's just so gorgeous, but it's like they work together despite the fact that we did not have one conversation um before we started.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you both for allowing us to be able to host these portraits together in the same space. They're so beautiful, they're so powerful. And I just can't thank you enough for your generosity and being here with me today and speaking in such detail about your process and about the different meanings and your approach to these portraits. So I just really want to thank you, Amy. Thank you, Kehinde. It's really been an honor to have you here with us this afternoon. And thank you all for joining today's program. And we hope you get a chance to visit the Obama portraits, which will be on view starting tomorrow, June 18th through August 15th. And for more information on upcoming virtual events such as this, please visit us online at artic.edu, that's artic.edu, and look out for our monthly e-news in your inboxes, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, everyone, especially Amy and Kehinde.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Hello.